My sister-in-law threw coffee on my wedding dress 1 hour before the ceremony, but when my husband discovered her plan to get back with his ex, they kicked her out of the family and now she lives with the lover who never could be. I'm 28 years old. I work in digital marketing, and after 4 years of putting up with my sister-in-law, Elizabeth basically treating me like I was invisible or worse, everything finally exploded on my wedding day when the bitch decided to throw iced coffee all over my dress 1 hour before the ceremony. And when I say throw, it wasn't an accident. She did it on purpose, with full intention. But I'll get to that, because you need to understand all the context of this shit show I've been living through. I met Nathan about 6 years ago, more or less, at a super boring work conference, one of those where everyone's half asleep after lunch. He was presenting something about process optimization or I don't know what, and I was in the third row trying not to fall asleep with the worst coffee I've ever had in my life. Anyway, some mutual friends introduced us afterward and we started talking, and honestly, we connected immediately. You know, one of those conversations that flows effortlessly, and where you laugh at the same stupid things. We started dating like 6 months after meeting, and everything was going perfect. I mean, he was amazing, attentive, funny, we had the same life plans, everything. But here comes the problem, and it's that Nathan has a younger sister, Elizabeth, who was like 22 when I met him, and this girl was obsessed, literally obsessed, with Nathan ending up with her best friend Alexis. And it's not like I imagined it or I'm paranoid. It was super obvious from the first day I met her. The first time I went to Nathan's parents' house for a family dinner, Elizabeth greeted me with a super dry hello and spent the rest of the night basically ignoring me while texting, I don't know who on her phone. Nathan's mom, who's a super nice lady in general, told me later, like trying to smooth things over, that Elizabeth had had high hopes that Nathan and Alexis would get married someday. Turns out Nathan and Alexis had dated during college, like 3 years of an on and off relationship, one of those where they're fighting every 2 months about anything. Nathan told me the whole story because he didn't want me to find out from someone else and think he was hiding something, and basically he told me that he and Alexis were completely incompatible, that she wanted to live in the city and he wanted the suburbs, she wanted to have kids immediately and he wanted to wait. She was super social and he was more of a homebody. I mean, things that in the long run just weren't going to work. They broke up for good like a year before I met him, and according to Nathan, they both agreed it was for the best. There was no drama, no cheating. They just realized they had no future together. But of course, Elizabeth didn't see it that way. To her, Alexis was practically her sister, her best friend since they were like 12, and in her head, she already had this whole fantasy that they were going to be official sisters-in-law and their kids would grow up together, and all that stuff. So when I showed up, I basically ruined all her imaginary plans, and she blamed me for it, as if I had come to break up a relationship that had been dead for years. The thing is that Elizabeth and Nathan told me this little by little, had always been super spoiled at home, like daddy's little girl who was never told no to anything, so she was used to things going the way she wanted. During the first 4 years that Nathan and I were together, Elizabeth was consistently hostile toward me. Not in an obvious way in front of her parents, but in those subtle ways that make you feel like shit, but if you complain it seems like you're exaggerating. Things like not inviting me to small family gatherings and then saying, oh, I thought you were busy, or making passive-aggressive comments about my life decisions, my job, my clothes, whatever. One time, I think it was Christmas of our second year together, she brought Alexis to the family dinner without warning, and she spent the whole night trying to force conversations between Nathan and her, like asking Alexis about their college memories right when Nathan was there. It was super awkward for everyone. Even Nathan's parents looked annoyed. But Elizabeth didn't take the hint, or didn't want to. What bothered me most was that Alexis clearly still had feelings for Nathan. That was obvious to anyone with eyes. The way she looked at him, how she always found excuses to touch his arm when they talked, how she laughed exaggeratedly at anything he said. Nathan swore to me that he didn't feel anything for her anymore, that he only saw her as part of the past, and I believed him because he never gave me reasons to doubt. But it was still super frustrating to have to deal with that every time there was a family gathering where Elizabeth decided to bring her. Fast forward like 3 years, and Nathan finally proposes to me. It was on a beach trip we took. Nothing super elaborate, but very nice. Very us. We were walking along the shore at sunset. You know, super cliché, but beautiful. And he pulled out the ring and asked me if I wanted to marry him. Obviously, I said yes. I was super happy, crying and everything. We called our families that same night to tell them. And everyone was excited. My parents, Nathan's parents, his aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone congratulated us and was happy. Everyone except Elizabeth. When Nathan told her, she literally said okay and hung up. Not even a congratulations or I'm happy for you, nothing. Nathan's parents were mortified and called her later to scold her. But she just said she was busy when Nathan called and that's why she'd been so short. A super obvious lie because Nathan told me he heard she was watching TV in the background. We started planning the wedding, and honestly we thought a lot about whether to invite Elizabeth or not. Nathan didn't want his sister to be there if she was going to ruin the day. But his parents begged us to invite her. They said it was important to them that all the family be present, that Elizabeth was young and immature but she would eventually mature. All those things parents say when they don't want to accept that their child is a problem. In the end, we decided to invite her because we didn't want to create more drama than necessary, but honestly, I expected her to decline the invitation and save us the trouble. But no, she accepted. And not only that, but like 2 months before the wedding, she sent me a super long and syrupy message, saying she'd been thinking a lot about everything, that she realized she'd been unfair to me, that she wanted to start over and give me a real chance to be part of the family, that she was excited about the wedding and wanted to help with whatever she could. I was like, what the fuck? Because this came out of nowhere after 4 years of treating me like trash. But Nathan was super happy, saying his sister was finally maturing, that this was what we'd been waiting for. His parents were also happy. His mom called me crying with emotion, saying we were finally going to be a united family. I wanted to believe it. Honestly, I wanted to think that Elizabeth had had some kind of epiphany and was really ready to let go of her whole fantasy with Alexis and Nathan. The next 2 months were relatively calm. Elizabeth wasn't exactly warm with me, but at least she was civil. She responded to my messages about the wedding, came to planning meetings when we invited her. I was still a bit suspicious deep down, like that feeling that something wasn't right, but I tried to ignore it because I didn't want to be paranoid or create problems where maybe there weren't any. The wedding day arrived, and I was at the hotel where the ceremony was with my bridesmaids, my mom, and a couple of close friends. You know, getting ready and drinking champagne and taking pictures and all that. The dress was beautiful. It had taken me months to find it. It was princess style with an incredible embroidered bodice and a super fluffy skirt. Basically my dream dress. I'd put it on like half an hour before the ceremony for the pre-wedding photos, and everything was going perfect. The makeup turned out gorgeous. The hair was good. Everything was coming out exactly as I'd planned. Then there's a knock on the door, and it's Elizabeth. She was wearing the bridesmaid dress we'd chosen. She looked good. She came with a smile and an iced coffee in her hand, one of those big Starbucks ones. She says, "Can I come in for a second? I want to talk to you before the ceremony." And I think, okay, maybe she wants to apologize for everything or tell me something nice? I don't know. I was in a good mood and didn't suspect anything. My bridesmaids leave to give us privacy. My mom goes to the bathroom, and it's just Elizabeth and me in the room. Elizabeth comes closer and starts saying something about how beautiful I look, that she's happy Nathan found someone, and I'm standing there smiling, like an idiot, thinking this is the moment where we finally make peace for real. And then in literally 2 seconds, everything changes. Elizabeth lifts the iced coffee and throws it directly at my chest, soaking the entire dress bodice with that cold brown liquid. I was in shock, like paralyzed, watching the coffee absorb into the white fabric, making a huge brown stain right in the center of the dress. I couldn't process what had just happened. Elizabeth was standing there looking at me with this weird expression, like half satisfied, half scared, and I could only say, "What did you do? What did you do? What did you do?" Over and over like a broken record. My bridesmaids heard the noise and came running in, and when they saw the disaster, they started screaming. My mom came out of the bathroom and literally went pale. Elizabeth tried to say, "Oh no, it was an accident. It slipped." But I knew. I had seen perfectly how she'd lifted the cup intentionally and thrown it at me. It hadn't been any accident. And here comes what saved everything, because Nathan's mom was walking down the hallway at that moment and heard the commotion. She came into the room and saw the scene. The ruined dress, Elizabeth standing there with the empty cup, me crying, and she didn't need anyone to explain anything. She asked Elizabeth what happened exactly, and Elizabeth tried to maintain the accident story. But Nathan's mom knew her too well. She'd raised that manipulative girl for 26 years. She told her, "Elizabeth, tell me the truth right now." And something in her voice made Elizabeth break a little and admit that yes, she'd done it on purpose. But it was because I didn't deserve Nathan, that Alexis was better for him, that this whole wedding was a mistake. Nathan's mom exploded. And when I say exploded, I mean I'd never in my life seen that lady so angry. She yelled at Elizabeth to get out immediately, that she was out of the wedding, that she didn't want to see her near the ceremony, that she was going to talk to her father about this, but for the moment she should get the hell out of the hotel. Elizabeth tried to protest, started crying and saying she was sorry, but her mom literally grabbed her by the arm and practically dragged her out of the room. We could hear Elizabeth crying in the hallway, saying she just wanted the best for her brother, but her mom wasn't listening to any of it. I sat there in shock while my bridesmaids and my mom inspected the damage. The bodice was completely stained, and there was literally 1 hour until the ceremony. One of my bridesmaids called hotel room service explaining the emergency, and literally like 10 minutes later, a cleaning team arrived with all kinds of stain removers and products. They worked on the dress like it was surgery, very carefully, using hair dryers to dry it as they cleaned. My other bridesmaids called all the nearby beauty salons, asking if there was any way to fix a stained dress in record time. The ceremony was supposed to start at 5, and it was 4:15. I was crying, ruining the makeup that had taken 2 hours to do, thinking my wedding was ruined, that I wasn't going to be able to walk down the aisle with that stained dress, that everyone was going to see the stain and know something horrible had happened. Nathan called me asking what was going on because his mom had told him something, but not everything. And I could barely speak. I was so hysterical. He wanted to come up, but I told him no, that he's not supposed to see me before the wedding, because we'd already had enough bad luck for one day. Miraculously, the hotel team managed to remove like 90% of the stain. You could still notice it a little if you looked very closely, but nothing that couldn't be hidden with the bouquet or the way I stood. They touched up my makeup at lightning speed, fixed my hair that had gotten kind of messed up with all the stress, and at 5:45 I was finally ready. The ceremony started 45 minutes late. They had to entertain the guests with extra music and more champagne, but in the end it happened. I walked down the aisle on my dad's arm, and when I saw Nathan standing there waiting for me, all the drama from before kind of faded for a moment. We got married, said our vows. People cried. It was beautiful despite everything. But during the whole reception, I couldn't help thinking about Elizabeth, about what she'd done, about how twisted you must be to do something like that. Several guests asked why we'd started late and where Elizabeth was, and we simply said there'd been a last-minute problem with the dress and that Elizabeth had felt sick and couldn't stay. Nathan's parents went to confront her at her house that same night after the reception. They told her she was cut off financially, that they weren't going to pay her rent or her car or anything anymore, that she had to find a way to support herself because her actions had been unforgivable. They also told her she wasn't welcome at the family home until she apologized to me for real and showed she was willing to change. Elizabeth, according to what Nathan told me later, had a monumental tantrum, screaming that they always chose me over her, that she was their daughter and they should be on her side, that Alexis was practically part of the family and it was unfair that they were kicking her out for trying to protect Nathan from making a mistake. Nathan's parents didn't give in. They gave her 2 weeks to get out of the house where she was living, which they paid for, and find her own place. Elizabeth called them every day, crying, manipulating, saying she had nowhere to go, but they stayed firm. Nathan was devastated because he loved his sister despite everything, but he was also furious about what she'd done, so he supported his parents' decision. And here's where Elizabeth really showed her true colors. Like a week after the wedding, I started receiving messages from fake profiles on Instagram and Facebook, super aggressive messages saying I'd ruined her family, that Nathan was going to regret marrying me, that Alexis was better in every way. The messages were clearly from Elizabeth. She used the same writing style and referenced things only she knew. In one of the messages, she literally admitted she'd thrown the coffee on purpose, that she'd been planning it for weeks, that she wanted to ruin my perfect day like I'd ruined her dream of having Alexis as a sister-in-law. I was fed up. Completely fed up. I gathered screenshots of all the messages and sent them to Nathan, who showed them to his parents and basically confirmed that Elizabeth was completely off her rocker. So I did something that maybe I shouldn't have done, but that in the moment felt completely justified. I called Elizabeth from my real number, not from a message but a voice call, and when she answered, I told her exactly what I thought of her. I told her she was a spoiled and pathetic child, that she urgently needed therapy, that Alexis and she were a couple of losers who couldn't accept that Nathan had moved on with his life, that their sick friendship was sad to watch, that she'd ruined her relationship with her family over a ridiculous obsession, and that if she came near me or Nathan again, I was going to get a restraining order. I yelled all this at her, and honestly, it felt amazing to get out all the rage I'd accumulated over 4 years. Elizabeth started crying on the phone, saying she just wanted the best for Nathan, and I told her that if she really wanted the best for him, she'd let him be happy with whoever he chose, not with whoever she wanted. I hung up and blocked her everywhere, and told Nathan to do the same. But Elizabeth, being Elizabeth, wasn't going to leave things like that. Like 3 days after that call, Nathan's mom gets a call from her sister, Nathan and Elizabeth's aunt, saying that Elizabeth had arrived at her house in the middle of the night crying, saying her parents had kicked her out unfairly, that Nathan and I were horrible to her, that she had nowhere to go. The aunt, who lived in another city and didn't know the whole story, had taken her in thinking she was really being mistreated. Elizabeth had basically left the house without telling anyone, turned off her phone, and went to live with her aunt, making her believe she was the victim of this whole situation. Nathan's parents were desperate, not because they particularly missed Elizabeth at that moment, but because technically, she was an adult. But she was still their daughter, and they wanted to know she was okay. They called the aunt, explaining the whole real story, about the coffee on the dress, the harassing messages, everything. The aunt was shocked because Elizabeth had told her a completely different version, where basically I was a bridezilla who hated her for no reason, and the parents supported me because they preferred their daughter-in-law to their own daughter. Turns out this wasn't the first time Elizabeth had done something like this. Nathan's parents told us that since high school, every time Elizabeth had problems or didn't get her way, she did these dramatic disappearances, going to some distant relative's or friend's house and making them believe she was a victim of abuse or mistreatment. She'd done it like 4 times before, once when they wouldn't let her go to a concert, another when she failed an exam and they punished her, things like that. She always came back after a few days when she realized no one was going to come begging her to return. The aunt told Elizabeth she had to leave, that she wasn't going to be part of her manipulations, and Elizabeth had to find another place. According to what we learned later, she went to live with Alexis, because of course, who else was going to take her in? Alexis. And she were 2 of a kind. 2 people who couldn't let go of the past and move on with their lives. Nathan and I went on our honeymoon. Like 2 weeks after all this drama, we needed to leave the country and disconnect from everything. We went to Italy. It was beautiful. We tried not to talk about Elizabeth or anything related to her during those 10 days, but when we came back, there was more drama waiting for us. Alexis had tried to contact Nathan through LinkedIn, of all platforms, sending him a super long message about how Elizabeth was devastated, how it was unfair that her family had abandoned her, that he should talk to his parents to forgive her. Nathan responded with something super curt, telling her to stay out of family matters that didn't concern her, and that if Elizabeth wanted to fix things, she could start with a real apology and maybe years of therapy. Alexis didn't respond after that, but then started posting things on social media, vague posts about loyalty and true friendship and how some people abandon their family for strangers, obviously referring to us although without naming us. At that point, we was so tired of all this that I suggested to Nathan that maybe we should call the police and report Elizabeth as a missing person, like as a reverse psychology move to force her to appear and stop playing the victim. Nathan thought it was going too far, but his parents considered the idea because they were fed up with not knowing if Elizabeth was really okay or just manipulating everyone. We didn't get to do it because literally 2 days after we had that conversation, Elizabeth showed up at her parents' door. She rang the doorbell at 10 at night on a Tuesday, and when Nathan's dad opened the door, there was Elizabeth with her suitcases, demanding they apologize to her for treating her so badly, saying she was the one who deserved an apology, not me. Nathan's dad, who's generally super calm and patient, told her she was completely delusional if she thought anyone was going to apologize to her after what she'd done. Elizabeth started screaming in the entryway that it was her house, and she had a right to be there, and Nathan's dad literally had to call the police to remove her from the property because she refused to leave. The police arrived, and Elizabeth tried to tell them her version of the story where she was the victim, but the officers basically told her it was private property and if the owners asked her to leave, she had to leave. Elizabeth left crying, screaming that her family was horrible, that someday they were going to regret it. According to Nathan, who saw everything on the security cameras because by that point he and I were already living together in our own place, it was completely surreal to see his sister acting like that. Like 2 more weeks passed, and I received an email from Elizabeth. It was long, like 3 pages, where basically she said she was very sorry for everything, that she realized she'd acted badly, but that I had to understand she was just being a good friend to Alexis and a good sister, trying to protect Nathan. She still wasn't accepting real responsibility. It was all I know, it was wrong, but I had good intentions. And I hope you can forgive me because I really want to be part of the family. She didn't mention anything about the dress specifically, or about the harassing messages. Just a vague and generic apology that she'd clearly written because someone told her she had to apologize if she wanted her parents to talk to her again. Nathan and I read the email together and decided we weren't going to respond. Not immediately, at least. Maybe in the future, if Elizabeth really changed and did therapy and showed she could be a decent person, we'd consider having some kind of relationship with her. But for now, we needed distance. His parents had the same stance. They responded that they appreciated the apology, but it was going to take a long time to rebuild trust. That for the moment, it was better that everyone went their separate ways. As far as I know, Elizabeth is still living with Alexis, working some part-time job because without her parents' support, she can't maintain the lifestyle she was used to. Alexis is probably filling her head with ideas that were all terrible and that Nathan will someday realize his mistake and go back to her because they both live in some kind of alternate reality. Nathan talks to his parents every week and sometimes they mention Elizabeth in passing, saying she called asking for money or sent another message trying to manipulate them, but they stay firm in their position. Last week, Nathan and I were organizing wedding photos to finally make the album we'd been putting off. And when we got to the photos from before the ceremony, the ones they took right after cleaning the dress, Nathan asked me if I'd ever be able to forgive Elizabeth for ruining that moment. I told him the truth, that I didn't know, that maybe someday when it didn't hurt so much anymore and when Elizabeth really showed she'd changed, but for now I was fine leaving her out of my life. He hugged me and told me he felt the same way, that his sister had chosen her sick obsession over her own family, and those were consequences she had to live with. I guess at the end of the day, I married the love of my life, despite all of Elizabeth's attempts to ruin it, and that's what matters. We have our life together, we're happy, and we don't need the approval or presence of someone who never wanted the best for us. Sometimes I think about how things would have been if Elizabeth had accepted our relationship from the beginning, if we could have been friends or at least been civil. But then I remember the iced coffee soaking my dress and it passes. Some people just can't be happy for others, and Elizabeth is one of those people. And honestly, she's not my problem anymore.